Hello, everybody. Sorry I can't be with you today. Candy asked me if I could just give you a brief introduction to medical applications of polymer additive manufacturing. I'm Richard Bibb, Professor of Medical Applications and Design in the School of Design and Creative Arts at Loughborough University. I've been involved in additive manufacturing and medical applications since 1998. So I'm hoping to just take you through the basic processes and just highlight a few things to consider when looking at medical applications of additive manufacturing. Potential advantages of thermoplastic AM for medical applications are the same as those for other application areas. The ability to produce artifacts on demand, the ability to produce things in small volumes or one-offs, the ability to change designs rapidly, responding to demand with flexible production, etc. However, there are particularly relevant things to medical applications. Every person is unique, and the ability to use additive manufacturing to personalize and customize medical devices can lead to better results. As with other areas of manufacturing, there are certain things that are important in medical applications, most notably things like reliability, predictability, consistency, and traceability. However, we also have the added complications in medical devices of biocompatibility, cleaning, and sterilization to consider. We also need to think about increasingly the end-of-life disposal, which for medical devices has been very poor up to date with a reliance on single-use devices. And we should look more towards circular approaches. So one of the things I'll add is a consideration of sustainability and potentially recycling. So when we think about mainstream methods of manufacture, AM still faces the same challenges they have of achieving high levels of reliability, predictability, and consistency that are required for highly regulated sectors like the medical devices industry, or for example, aerospace. In particular, for medical devices, traceability can be a challenge for additive manufacturing, where materials batching and mixing of materials is often commonplace. For some AM processes, there are issues of biocompatibility or problems depending on the chemistries involved in the materials that are necessary to make these processes work. Cleaning and sterilization can pose a problem for many AM materials due to typical properties like low glass transition temperatures, or the effects of harsh chemicals might have on thermoplastics. As I mentioned, end of life is a challenge for all medical devices, and it's particularly a challenge for additive manufacturing materials where they are mixed or specialist chemicals or proprietary materials which don't lend themselves very easily to reuse or recycling. So if we quickly go through the main thermoplastic AM processes, I'll try and highlight a few issues to consider. So for material extrusion, it's a very well-established process. It's mechanically quite simple. The materials are quite well known. So reliability and predictability are now quite good, particularly for industrial standard equipment with expensive professional standards of machinery. Equipment consistency can be still limited though, and it does depend on keeping equipment highly calibrated and regularly maintained. Traceability can be challenging where material batches get mixed. You're partway through builds or where you're trying to optimize the use of materials. Biocompatibility may be limited depending on the material being used and also what the purpose is, particularly for long-term use or for implants. Cleaning and sterilization can pose a problem because we're typically talking about thermoplastics with low glass transition temperatures or low melting points, which might be affected by high temperatures used in autoclaves or steam autoclaving, or by harsh chemicals used in aggressive cleaning or sterilization routines. Surface life of parts can potentially be quite good depending on what the purpose is, but we've got to think about the effects of anisotropy and particularly fatigue on functional medical devices. End of life can be quite good if it's a pure material that's not been adulterated with additives, but it can be more challenging where additives have been added to the materials either to make them stronger or to make them more suitable or successful for material extrusion. You can, of course, now increasingly get filaments that are made from recycled materials. So there is some sustainability potential benefit there. However, it's difficult when mixing your plastic waste with typical recycling regimes. So material extrusion typically produces rigid, sturdy plastic parts, making it good for things like medical and anatomical models, especially teaching models. But it can also be used to make molds, jigs, and fixtures that are used in the production of other medical devices. It's suitable for immobilization splints and other forms of orthoses, and it can be used in prosthetics. And it's even been used to 3D print customized pharmaceuticals. Powder bed fusion, laser sintering typically is well-established process. The machinery is often expensive and sophisticated, so reliability and predictability tend to be relatively good. Consistency can be challenging both within the build and across builds. Machines need to be very carefully maintained and calibrated on a regular basis, which can prove expensive. Biocompatibility is limited because the choice of materials itself is also quite limited. So depending on the application, that may be a problem. Traceability can be very challenging because you're not only talking about potentially mixing different batches of new powders, but it's commonplace to recycle a certain percentage of used powder with new powder, which could make traceability difficult. Cleaning and sterilization can be challenging, although the materials can withstand quite high temperatures. You can be quite aggressive with them in terms of temperature and some chemicals, but they can pose a problem because of the porosity of the material, which tends to ingrain dirt. So for long-term applications and wearable applications, the ingress of dirt within the porosity of the part makes cleaning very, very difficult. End-of-life recycling is possible, with these plastics. It depends what they've been used for. For example, so if they've been used for a surgical guide and they've been contaminated with blood, that's going to be very difficult to decontaminate in order to recycle that material. So laser sintered parts, typically robust, so they're very good for medical anatomical models. They can be used for molds, jigs and fixtures, although, as I mentioned, the porosity can be an issue if you're trying to use it as a mold. They can be used to make immobilization splints and orthoses, notwithstanding the issues about cleaning that I've already mentioned. Laser sintering has been successfully applied to surgical cutting guides, although this requires a dedicated facility and a lot of supporting infrastructure to achieve. So that is an expensive undertaking. That polymerization processes like stereolithography generally predictable and consistent with relatively few moving parts, and the use of lasers makes them relatively accurate and reliable. Traceability can be challenging, particularly where batches of resin might be mixed. For example, you have a vat of resin, then have to top it up with fresh material. You'll be mixing those batches. Biocompatibility can be limited. There are biocompatible resins available. However, they are typically for use outside the body and in dental applications. And there are challenges for longer term use or for implants. Cleaning and sterilization can be challenging. Although these materials are thermosets, not thermoplastics, they typically suffer from softening or detrimental effects when exposed to high levels of humidity, heat, or harsh chemicals. Service life can be poor. Materials are typically brittle. They suffer from UV degradation and from the effects of exposure to chemicals and humidity. And end of life is a particular problem for these materials as they cannot be recycled. That polymerization is good for medical anatomical models. The ability to produce transparent parts can be particularly helpful. It can be used for making small molds because of good surface finish and its density. There are successful applications in dental technology, and the high resolution and the liquid materials and the accuracy makes it ideal for fluidics and fluidic devices. It's been extensively used in maxillofacial surgery and prosthetics, and it can be used to make surgical guides. Material jetting machines are very sophisticated, expensive pieces of equipment, and so reliability, predictability, and consistency is typically very good. Traceability can be challenging depending on the materials being used because you may have to change cartridges midway through a build. Biocompatibility is challenging due to the chemistries involved in materials, but biocompatible materials are available. As before, cleaning and sterilization can be difficult because the effects of harsh chemicals and high temperatures can have on the materials. Service life also tends to be poor, like with that polymerization, suffering from creep and humidity exposure and the degradation by UV light. End of life recycling is also, as with that polymerization, pretty much impossible. But the ability to produce multiple materials and colors and transparent parts is a unique advantage. So for material jetting, the ability to produce models in multiple materials in the same build and produce transparent and colored parts makes it excellent for really very complicated and really visually stunning medical models, for particularly useful for teaching purposes. It's also suitable for small molds, dental appliances and fluidics, although removing support material from fluidics can be challenging. It's frequently used in maxillofacial surgery and prosthetics, and again has been used to make surgical guides. So I appreciate that's a really quick run through the major processes, and I've only touched upon the issues involved really, but in summary, the main things to think about in terms of Polymer AM for medical devices, really over and above the usual things that you'd consider, are traceability, biocompatibility, cleaning and sterilization, and service life. But I encourage you all to also try and think about sustainability and the circular economy. I hope the rest of the event goes well, and I look forward to seeing the results of your projects and your ideas coming to fruition. Thanks very much. Bye.